Welcome back to NMRA X January edition. We've got another fun filled 4 hours for you. And for the next hour, we're going to have Robert Thomas present his Cherokee and Crawford layout. He hails from San Antonio, Texas, and has been modeling the St. Louis and Frisco in his 1920s, in the 1920s time frame. His layout set in the southeast of Kansas. So, Robert Thomas, why don't you tell us what it takes to operate on a small layout?
Yeah, howdy, Brooks. Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining today. Go ahead and share my screen here. Today, I'm going to give a presentation titled Introduction to JMRI on Operations on a Small Layout. And as part of that, I'm going to use the layout that that Brooks described, part of my home layout, is the worked example to look through how to use what's a good approach for using JMRI. So with that, let me just give you a quick introduction. As Brooks mentioned, I'm from San Antonio, Texas. I'm part of the Lone Star region of the NMRA and Division 6, which is South Texas. Uh, Here you see picture me with the speed captured not in the helix. So good time in Dallas last year at a train show in the area. As Brooks mentioned, I presented last June and gave an overview of the layout that we're going to use part of today as the worked example. So first, what is JMRI? Many folks in model railroading are familiar with JMRI. It's a set of software tools for model railroad computer control. It's an open source application that's free to download, and it's available on a number of types of computers: Windows, Linux, on Mac. Primary components of JMRI include Decoder Pro. Many people use that part of the software set for programming their decoders, their locomotives, managing a locomotive roster. And it also contains an application called Panel Pro, which can be used to set up signaling, control panels for your layout, control turnouts from the computer screen, and a number of options for that part. But it also, within Panel Pro, is something called Operations Pro, which allows you to create manifests, route cars around the layout, and more. And that's the subject of today's presentation. So for many in model railroading, the main goal of the hobby is operations itself. And so, Beth in the Queen's Gambit recently goes to bed playing chess games imagined on the ceiling. The model railroader, of course, goes to bed and imagines the operations and how cars will move and how to maximize what they're going to get out of this layout they're going to build, making it realistic against a prototype, etc. And so that's what we're looking at today. Uh, how can we use JMRI to simulate or conduct operations on the layout? Now, if you're designing a layout or have not yet built a layout, working with operations in JMRI does not require a layout to be built. It doesn't require a connection to the layout. And examining how you can operate the layout during that design phase using JMRI can give you a lot of additional insight as you work to refine your design. That includes looking at numbers and types of cars you might need, providing information on the use of how you would use yards, interchanges, numbers of tracks you would need there, types of trains you're going to run. If you're interested in a certain number of operators and adding interest for your group of friends, certainly you can design that through the use of JMRI, even if you don't use JMRI in the end as the final operations approach for your layout. Today, we're going to walk through some of the basic features of the JMRI operations and apply that to a small layout. So getting started with JMRI, you're going to download and install JMRI on your computer. It's available, as I said, for Windows computers, Macs, Linux. If you have a Raspberry Pi, you could even run it on there. You'll most likely, if you're working with operations, want to have a computer connected to a printer so you can print out the manifest, the switch list that you have during operations. If you're looking to have information on installing JMRI, it's not really the subject of the talk today. But if you visit jmri.org on the internet, there are detailed instructions for a variety of operating systems for your computer. So when you fire up JMRI and you're interested in examining or getting into Operations Pro, what you want to do is open Panel Pro within JMRI and find in the menus under Tools, Operations, and Settings this window. You can name the railroad that you're interested in building, give a few other parameters here, sort of maximum train length, a few other things. But what you want to do is check this box, add operations to the main menu, which makes it easy to find the operations menus when you open Panel Pro in JMRI. So there are several basic components of operations in JMRI. They include locations, the cars that you have, locomotives. Now we're not going to get into locomotives today, but that's an aspect if you have locomotives and operations and of the locomotives as part of your scheme. We're going to keep it simple and not go into that in this short talk that we have today. Routes, the paths your trains are going to take, and then building the trains themselves and operating them. Many of the details here could be found in the JMRI User's Guide online. If you look at the top of the page there's something like 200 links for various details and options within this setup. So it can be a bit daunting to get started. So we're going to go through this and keep it simple to begin with for our small layout. So first, let's look at locations within JMRI. Now, locations is going to include having spur tracks, yards, classification tracks, and interchanges, as well as staging tracks. And each of those types of tracks within locations are going to have differing behaviors for the operations. Spurs, the first of those, are used to service an industry. So a car brought into a spur, its load is swapped between loaded and empty, or empty and loaded, depending on your choice or the state of the car, depending on how simple you keep it. But you can configure a number of options here: where to return empty cars that maybe are unloaded at that industry, which trains are going to service the spur, a number of options. Now, when you're getting started, the easiest thing to do is just keep it simple and enable the most car movement. Don't try to get into many of the details, just assign a type of car to a spur. Classification tracks and interchanges. In those instances, the car's load does not change. The car is parked there and waits on another train. And so the cars are interchanged with the same or another road. Often this approach or this type of track is used for a local switcher. Cars are dropped off. Switcher locomotive comes in and exchanges cars and takes it to local industries. So you can configure that again for different destinations being serviced, which routes that the trains can take can service that interchange, types of cars, etc. Use again the simplest options here when you're starting out. The second and third types of locations include yards, which are used to store cars or locomotives. Here, the car's status, loaded or empty, does not change when it's delivered to the yard track. And in here you can select again types of cars, types of load services for a particular track. If you want to park, say coal hoppers on a certain track within the yard, the railroads that are going to use that yard track if you have multiple railroads coming through an area, and the order of pickup. So you could have the first in, first out, for example. And then staging tracks, which are locations that generate your traffic to and from the layout. Staging track has the unique feature that it holds a complete train at a time as part of the operation scheme or the approach in the software. And when you're using these staging tracks, JMRI needs to find locations for all the cars and locomotives, or you get build errors as you're using the operations in JMRI. You can configure when you're creating staging to accept all types of cars and roads to avoid some build errors. You can select various options in staging. You can have the staging track swap the loads and empties for cars. You can empty cars with default or custom loads and generate custom loads for the layout as you build more and more detail and use more and more options within JMRI for operations. Now, to edit a location, when you dive into the menus within JMRI and select locations, you get this window that's in the bottom left here. It gives you a list of locations. It begins as empty. You click the add button, and you're able to build up a list of locations for your layout. And as you edit or add those locations, you get a series of windows that allow you to name the location, assign directions of trains that will service the location, types of cars, and then add a series of types of locations or types of tracks within that location. And here we're giving the example of adding an interchange track and then specifying the details of that interchange track, like its length and direction that the train is moving. We'll go through an example of this as we look at our specific small layout. You also need cars to operate, and the JMRI has a menu item that is the list of cars that you're going to use in operations, and you populate this list with an interface we'll see here in a second. But the list of cars tracks not only the type of car, the road number, its current status, loaded or empty, but also its location and a cumulative count of how many moves the car has made. And if a train is built, it tells you where the car is going and which train that it's on. When we go to add a car within the list of cars in JMRI, we get this menu, this window, and it allows us to give many options. The things that you're going to want to enter to begin are the car's reporting mark, its road number, the type of car, and the length of the car, because the JMRI is going to compute the occupancy of various tracks against their length for accommodation of that car during operations. JMRI will also provide a weight estimate automatically, and you can add additional details that you can show in various lists, things like build dates, comments, a kernel. A kernel allows you to group a set of cars that are moved together in a single move, and that's useful for, say, a set of hoppers that are all going to be strung together and used as a group for a mine or something of that nature. You can import from these lists of cars from a text file if you look in JMRI documentation. So if you have some other accounting system that you've used for your cars, it's possible to import that list and get it into JMRI quickly. The other option here in operations is the route, and the route is going to be a ordered series of locations that a train is going to visit during as it traverses the layout during the operation. Trains are later going to be assigned against these routes. So what you're doing is you're creating the series of stops that the train is going to make, or the locations it's going to visit along its path, so that when you assign a train to that list, it has a path to take and a list of industries to visit. If you look at the means of editing routes in JMRI, you see something like this. You add locations one at a time in a list, provide the direction of the train. The industries look to see if they are serviced against a given direction of train movement. The number of moves that are requested along the route at each of the locations, so that each of those is a drop off or a pickup or set out of a car. You can assign during the route, yes or no, I want to pick up and set out cars. And I also can set things like a random number here that is a chance that I will stop and perform those operations at that location. Now, these other options we won't dive into, but hopefully it's clear that here is you're assigning this list of places you're going to visit and some aspects that are going to affect operation. Now, the last part of this is then assigning a train against that route. And so in the trains menu, you add a train, give it a name, a description, things like its departure time and the schedule. JMRI will show you, if you've picked a given route, what places it's going to visit, and a few other options like adding a locomotive if you start the types of locomotives if you're going to use that kind of option. So in the end, we're going to build a series of trains that are each going to use one of those routes you've created, which is a series of stops and details about operation along those stops. After that is done and you build a train, this menu gives you options for building and moving the train along as part of dispatching and operating. So you see, and as you move from place to place, there's a state of the layout and where the various cars are, and you can observe that as part of this interface. So after you've built the train, one of the things you can do is preview the train and generate a manifest here in the language of JMRI, which is the thing you would print out, the document you would print out, and have a list of activities, the things that you're going to do as part of the operations, pick up and set out of various cars, and the locations at which that's going to happen in an order. Now, you know, JMRI doesn't tell you specifically the order or how to do this. It's just giving you a list of work at a series of locations along the way. So some notes here, there are many configuration options for things like the manifest and all of these options in the Operations Pro. You can do things like for your manifest is create a color configuration. You saw the setouts and pickups were color coded in the previous screen. You can use a built-in text editor for black and white print or the JMRI version of that. You can generate debugging if you have build failure for a train, meaning JMRI could not create a series of moves that represents a successful traverse of the route. And if you're speaking to someone about JMRI operations and trying to get assistance, having that build report printed is an important option, saving it and sending it to someone that's trying to help you because it has details of what JMRI tried to do in order to build the train and give you a manifest. So there are many options. If you look into the manifest print options here as an example, there are many things you can do like set the colors, choose the type of editor you're going to view that with, pick different options that will appear in the format of the report or the manifest. So that's very handy, and you can perform a variety of things from customizing the built-in to exporting and using other folks' formats for those manifests. So let's look quickly at an example layout here. We're going to use what we'll call the Weir City branch line on the Frisco, which is part of my home layout. And so this is a relatively small shelf layout. It would be sections that are about 18 inches wide and fit in the corner of a room. The layout, if we follow it around from the bottom left here, includes a couple of staging tracks, which represent the sources of trains from Cherokee Junction to interchange here with the Missouri Pacific, to the junction, Weir Junction, which leads to Weir City, and an area with a variety of industries to switch. Beyond the city, there is a brickyard that is serviced in a possible location within JMRI for the operations. And so some of the components that are here, we have a staging yard, a town with 7 industries, a couple of other locations that we want to assign operations to, including Young's Mine up here in the top left-hand corner, which represents a mine, the lead to the mine as a siding or a spur. And then there are 2 interchanges. There's an interchange that is with the Missouri Pacific midway here on the left. And then there is an interchange track within Weir itself to park cars here on the corner. So, what is the approach for building an operations scheme for this small layout within JMRI? Well, there's the prospect of real trains, the trains that your operators are going to run and have manifests and duties. So here we'll have a Weir City trip, places it will visit along the way of the layout. A brick train, which is a train designed to service the brickyard, as a large number of spots, and visits a couple of uh, other sites along its way, including Young's Mind and the interchange in Weir. A local Weir switcher for the industries within town. So if you imagine you'd like to have an additional operator on the layout while trains are being serviced back in staging to provide the next series of runs, a local switcher within town might be a nice option, and then a second train into town following. Here the example is to show that the same route can be used for multiple trains. Now, the other concept that we're going to add here is the use of virtual trains that are really to service things like the interchanges on the layout. So, as an example, we're going to use as a reservoir of cars, some storage boxes that are off to the side on a shelf next to the layout that contains the cars that are in reserve. And we have an operations action within JMRI that takes cars from the storage. Someone is going to 050 them. They're going to place them by hand on the interchange, pulling cars off the interchange to give some variety. But this allows the cars to continue to be tracked within JMRI and provide that functionality of the interchange. Similarly, as we have trains built in staging, they are going to pull from this reservoir of cars to build the next train and return cars to this reservoir as they return from these turns on the branch line to Weir. So here's the approach. We're going to look through the options that we have for locations and places that we want to mark for the operator as distinct geographic locations on the layout. So think of these as like items that would appear in your timetable. So we want to think about what areas would be switched without interaction with the neighboring areas. Those would be distinct locations on the layout, where some of those locations will have multiple spurs and be considered a single spot to visit. So we may choose to divide some areas while they're near to one another as distinct locations to make it easier to make assignments for specific trains and be shown as separate locations in the timetable or in the manifest. You may choose to further divide various locations in order to uh, have an order of events that's desired and also ensure car distributions. Uh, Here we've got multiple industry spurs interchanges available. So on the Weir branch line, what we're going to do is we're going to build an example of operations in JMRI where we have this list of locations. Cherokee Junction is a point for the operators representing leaving staging. That Missouri Pacific interchange is a location. Young's Mine out there beyond the junction to the Weir branch line will be a separate location. Weir Junction will show that as just a location without operations for the operators to guide them. Have the town of Weir City. An interchange track within Weir is separate. The brickyard is separate to provide distinction for that separate train that is designated as the brickyard train. Then we have staging and storage that we're going to use during the operation. So this is the breakdown of how we're going to build within JMRI. So let's look at some of those locations and how we would build them. We've got a Missouri Pacific interchange. The interchange is from the Parsons sub of the Frisco here to the Pittsburgh sub on the Mopac. There is this track that is about 130 feet long. Only 3 cars. Remember, this is a kind of a small layout. It'll be a universal industry. It's going to take all kinds of cars, and we want to service this as going eastbound. To the right is going to be east. To the left is going to be west on the layout as we build all of this. So we edit locations within JMRI following the menus of operations, locations, add. and we add a location we're going to call Missouri Pacific Interchange, have it service trains going eastward, create a track at that location that is a classification interchange track, edit it to have its name, its length, the direction are indicated there again. And all these cars are selected. All kinds of types of cars are available for taking on and off the layout through the interchange. Another location is that Young's Mine, number two. It's represented only as a lead track that's about 90 feet long, so only a couple of cars. And it's going to be serviced by trains going west, so around counterclockwise to the left here because of the direction of the spur is facing. We're also going to have this Weir City interchange, which is a siding in Weir City of a length of about 140 cars. We're going to have uh, park them between Main Street and the junction there, the beginning of the siding there. So to configure those things, for example, Young's Mine, we're going to go into JMRI within the menus, build something called Young's Mine number two, serviced going west, coal hoppers. And here we're going to build a spur that we're going to call the mine lead. And within that, we're going to edit that spur track, have its length, and then create what is called a schedule within JMRI here to show that as an example, a custom schedule for the mine siting. And when we edit it, it's going to receive or operate against coal hoppers, taking any road, and receive empty cars and ship loaded coal cars. So that's what you want from the mine. You want the JMRI operations to drop off the empties, and you're going to be providing loaded cars there. So to make the operations more realistic, especially in these cases where you have something like a coal hopper and want to show the loads there, you can create this schedule and JMRI will indicate, or guide the cars such that empty cars are delivered and loaded cars are shipped. Now, another location that we have is Weir City itself. It has this house track that goes behind the depot that has a number of industries, a feed mill, a team track, a freight house at the depot, a grain elevator, some mine supplies here, oil tanks, and then Long Bell Lumber, which is going to spot a car over towards the main, the siding against the main here. So we have all of these items we want to add and treat this Weir City as a location in JMRI, but with multiple spurs. So we'll go in and do that. We'll go in and create, editing the location of Weir City, and add these series of locations, each of which is a spur, each of which has a given length depending on the length on the layout and the to fit the number of cars that we have. And if we edit those, for example, if we edit Standard Oil as we have built those all as spurs, note here on the form they're all built as spurs. As we edit that, Standard Oil is an example. It's a 50-foot length spur. It's part of a spur that is really divided into two industries, a mine supply and this Standard Oil. And we assign it tank cars within JMRI, tank gas, kerosene, oil, and allow the car trains traveling east or west to service this. There's a runaround nearby. And there we go. We have an industry spur track that is going to only take and ship tank cars, and one at a time, being probably 50 feet long. Only one car is going to fit. So another thing that we're going to look at here is the Bates Mill industry, and we're going to change things up here. We're going to make a schedule for Bates Mill such that it isn't pulled for service on every trip. And we do that by editing the schedule for Bates Mill, looking at each type of car that might be serviced, and assigning a random number from 50 to 30% to that car, so that 1 and 2 or 1 and 3 trains will actually hit that industry for service. So you can do that if you have a large number of industries and your train length is limited. You can give a probability and then have an assortment and a variety of operational kind of puzzles for this small layout against all of the spots that you have. So with that, we've edited the types of cars that we have that will service. And as I've said, within the industry, the ability to edit a schedule in this window at the left is defining that schedule. And let's look one more industry here, the brickyard. The brickyard docks are going to have two tracks, which total about 300 feet. So about 6 or 7 40-foot cars can be spotted there. And here we're also going to create a schedule because we want to have empties come in and loaded cars with bricks go out. Again, we've got a variety of cars we're going to add to the schedule when we build and edit that location, receiving empties, shipping loads of each of these types of cars. So with those examples, you can create some detail as far as the operation, types of cars, where they're gonna go beyond service here. We have an interchange in JMR in Weir City that we're going to configure in JMRI. It's just a track where we're going to park cars so that we can have a local city switcher come here, get some cars, address those to the various industries in town, pull a few uh, spots from the industries back to the interchange, and that gives us a local job within Weir, and is a nice add for another operator using the layout. So you see here we've configured this short 150-foot area of track as a interchange or classification yard. And here you can see we've set the length, assigned east and westbound trains, and a wide variety of cars available. Okay, so we've done that. Let's review. We've gone through JMRI, created a number of industries, configured them for their operations in terms of the length of the spur or length of the interchange track, what types of cars are going to be loaded and unloaded, and in some cases given a schedule so that we ensure that we're delivering empty, shipping loaded cars, for example. We're gonna go ahead and create routes so that we have a couple of Weir City trains, both using the same route. A brickyard train that visits the brickyard, the interchange in Weir and the Young's Mine, and we're going to create a Weir switcher for a local job. So we'll go into JMRI now and look at the operations. Within operations, we're going to create a route for those three types of trains that we're interested in, plus a route for the Missouri Pacific interchange, that local, where we're just going to swap cars from storage. So each of those, we add them to JMRI under routes and go in and edit them. And so editing the route, again, looks something like this. You add a series of locations the train is going to visit, the direction the train is traveling, how many moves you're going to request at each of those locations, and then assign yes or no, I would like to have pickups and set outs along the way. As we go through and configure that, we're adding locations using the button that is down here at the bottom, choosing the location in a drop-down menu, and then these up and down buttons on the right here allow you to change the order of the series of locations as they appear in this list. Okay, so another example here is the brick train route. It's going to visit the locations we mentioned, come out of staging, pulling cars from storage, going around the layout from Cherokee Junction into Weir City, the brickyard, and then returning through a series of spots, some of them that have no cars delivered or set out or picked up, this location being either not serviced in that direction or a point on the layout just to guide the operator in the sequence of locations they're assigned to visit or traverse. And now we're ready to make the trains for our Weir branch line layout. We go in, we assign the various trains to those routes that we're interested in, describe them with a description here. And again, each of these trains is assigned a route, and we have an AM and PM local, each of which are going to use the same route. They're both going to use this Weir City service route. So multiple trains may use the same route. When we're ready, we hit build here. We hit the build button that constructs within JMRI the train. And then if it builds successfully, we get this preview button that when we click on allows us to look at the manifest for operating the train. And so here you see we're successful. We see the cars being pulled from that storage at staging, the train moving to Cherokee Junction, to the Mopac interchange, through Weir Junction, going into the city, having set outs and pickups, and then back to the Weir interchange, and then it goes off to another page and returns back home. So the design that we had is successful. We're visiting a number of industries and have cars to pick up and set out. The train that begins has to fit on the track that we've assigned, and so we assigned 8 cars to be pulled initially, up to 8, and I think that's what we have here, 7 or 8 cars pulled for the local. All right, so now we've got an operating layout. Each of those trains can be built. A manifest can be handed to the operator. When you're in JMRI, you can move the train in the computer as well as moving it along the way with the manifest and really operating. But you can also look at the results of that by going through, building and moving trains within that operations menu, within that trains menu, and look at how the layout is performing even before you pull out the cars and locomotives, or even maybe before you've built the layout. So one of the ways you can do that is you can build and move the sequence of trains that you would like to have during operations, or you've prescribed during operations, and you can look at where cars sit. And in the cars menu, or the cars window, you can see the number of moves, for example, that a car has made. And by doing this, you can, you know, determine, is there an issue with your approach for the operations? Do you have like one car that seems to be moved a lot? Maybe you'd like to have more of that type of car so that there's not repetition to the operator. You can also see things like this orphan here, where there's a car that hasn't moved, was because of an error that I had made, and the train was not being serviced in east and west, but I had prescribed north and south by accident. And so going in and fixing that is part of the debugging that you can do by looking at what you have in this operations setup. Okay, so this is only the beginning. This is a kind of a simple example for a small layout. There are many things you can do to refine the operation scheme, creating custom car loads for specific types of cars, refining your schedule. You can have alternate off-spot locations that prescribe work to bring in and service an industry from the off spot to load additional cars. You can add the locomotives and cabooses you want to use within the operations for a small layout like this. We don't really have a caboose track or an engine house, but you can do that as well. You can also link the train movement to the diagram of the layout and show it as an icon within Panel Pro. So there's a number of interesting things you can do and explore within JMRI. And here is a link to see that whole list of operations that are available. So you can also do a few things to add interest to the layout and its operation, even though it's a rather small layout. Remember, JMRI does not say how to service the various location. Right? It's up to the operator to figure out how to do this in the least number of moves or in an interesting way. But you can also provide things like you track and industry diagrams for your operators, give instructions for specific trains. For example, the brick train, maybe you don't want the operators when they set out cars to block Oak Street. You may ask them to block like empty coal hoppers in a certain location so it's easier to service the mine. The Missouri Pacific interchange on this in the prototype had a gate that had to be operated manually, and so stopping at that gate at the Mopac interchange would be an interesting feature. And also providing your operators with locomotive cards so that they understand some of the details of operating, or what's assigned where on decoders if you're using DCC. So if you're interested in this and interested in exploring it more than a 41-minute talk, there's a number of clinics listed on the JMRI community clinics page. There is a user group, it should be JMRI users group on groups.io that you can join, and it has many messages daily of folks getting help with their everything from operations to programming locomotives. I highly recommend that. Example that I started with was this JMRI operations, a worked example by David Haynes on the MRH forums. It's several parts, and it's a long written kind of presentation in the forums there, his blog, I guess you would say. And then on NMRA.org, if you're a member, there's an excellent pair of presentations by John Stewart from the 2014 Cleveland National Convention. I think it's 2 or 3 hours worth of discussion on using JMRI operations. And he does that work against an example from a layout planning book, using it to assemble and work through that. So with that, I'll end for today. We're at near our 45-minute mark. I'd be happy to take any questions that are out there.
My mic unmuted itself, and I didn't realize that. So
That's all right.
all right. Some of these are a little long here, so hopefully I might have to just read them to you here, but I'll try to paraphrase some of them. Is JMRI operations only designed to only work prototypically? Perhaps this one person that asked the question could not have a mainline train drop cars in an industrial area, and he needed to set up a fake yard to drop cars before the switch list would work. Have you had a problem with that? And if you have you figured out a way to fix that or work around it?
Yeah, so there are several situations like that where you have to build, through trial and error, a workaround, and sometimes it's something like that. The example I'm using here is like a storage track, which is my bin of cars to draw from. But often, yeah, you set it. You're going to end up setting up some sort of intermediate function or location that allows the sequence of operations to work in a way that's prototypical or workable, for your desired scheme. And again, I recommend, if you have a specific case you're trying to work out, put it on the JMRI IO groups.io list, and somebody no doubt will give you some advice for your specific one.
Cool. Okay. You were talking about importing the data from like another program in there. Is there specific formats that JMRI supports, like CSV or anything like that? And then does it need to be formatted a certain way for it to read that data?
Yes, it accepts both space delimited and comma delimited data. You could, a lot of folks have like their list of cars in Excel, right? So you can pick a set of columns in a certain sequence that's described in the operations page on the JMRI website. It gives some examples. You export either as comma delimited or space delimited data. A certain sequence that goes as like something like car number, road name, car type. It has to be in a certain order, and then JMRI will pull it in from that file, and your cars can be populated very quickly, because it is a bit tedious to go in that form one at a time and add cars, especially if you've got hundreds of cars.
Yeah. All right. Does the JMRI want scale length or actual length?
Yeah, the JMRI is assuming the scale length. You're putting it in the cars in feet. So a 40-foot box car, you put in 40 feet. And JMRI actually adds some distance for the coupler length. So,
Okay.
that's an important point. If you make a spur, with a location, a spot for an industry, and you make it 40 feet long, a 40-foot box car is not going to be delivered there, because JMRI thinks it's 40 foot plus the coupler links.
So I guess maybe if you did it the actual length of the car, would you just or say you just made the track length the actual length, do you think it would compute that way as well?
Yeah, I think if I take your meaning, it would, meaning that if I give myself a 40-foot spot, or I'm sorry, let's
Or
say I give myself a 45-foot spot, and I want to park 40-foot cars there, right? That will work. Making it the actual length plus typical couplers, which I think is 2 feet on each end.
oh, okay. Well, what I was thinking was if you just put in an 8-inch car, maybe had like a 36-inch, just
Yeah,
like your actual length of the site. That's what I was
yeah,
thinking of.
yeah. I think JMRI. There may be a configuration for this, but I have used the scale length
Yeah.
for what I have
Probably
done.
better that way. Yeah. Cool. Does JMRI support spur overloads that require off spot placement or later respotting?
Yes, it does. And I didn't go into that. This was designed to be a simple example, but you can assign an off spot for an industry if the spur is overloaded, and JMRI will route the cars to that location. And I don't
Okay.
recall quite how it works, if it works like an interchange or how its functionality really behaves, but there is that functionality.
Okay. All right. This question, you mentioned that adding the junction purely to help operators with
Hmm.
locating themselves.
Hmm.
Would you do the same for passing sightings?
Yeah, you could do that for passing sightings. If you have a timetable and are going to wait, that's useful. If you're doing passenger operations and you want to have the train stop at the depot, right, there is a wait function if that's a point on your timetable. So you could simulate the stop at the depot with that wait duration. But yeah, I think for a larger layout, guiding folks around the layout and giving some positions for orientation is a important thing to do.
Okay. Can JMRI support extras or second sections?
Yeah, I mean, you create the train list, and really, there's nothing requiring you to generate that train list in any specific order, right? You may have created it in the order that you imagined functioning, but you can create a train that is the extra, and then just hit build, whenever you're ready to run it, and it'll generate the train for you from, if you're building it from a local yard or a local interchange, and run it out along the route prescribed.
Cool. Does JMRA have let's say, like, how long does it leave a car at a spur to be loaded, unloaded? I'm thinking,
Mhm.
does it have a default time or can you specify a time for that? Or is there a way to?
Yeah, well, you can specify a wait if you're leaving the car for loading and unloading. You can prescribe within JMRI the order that things are done. So if you want to have first in, first out, or pull the most recent car spotted, you can do that sort of thing. I'm not sure if there's a way to attach a time, of day that that is required to pass before you can pick the car up again. I'd have to go back and look at that question.
Okay. When you do create a schedule and you direct JMRI to drop off empties and pick up loads, does it automatically change that status? Um, Say, like, when you do the next operating session, or do you have to manually change that status once the car's spotted there?
Yeah, if it's a spur, if that's the type of location, JMRI will flip from empty to loaded, for you, just as soon as that operation is complete, that drop off is complete. The next time you come, the car is switched in state. Staging can be, uh, there are options for the staging track so that it flips that. There are also options for the staging track to generate, like a load or a type of load that you're going to need out on the layout. And so, I mean, you can really get into complex, uh, configurations in which you are specific, shipping specific freight, if you will, from, say staging from off layout onto layout and back.
Okay. So this one guy asked or says that his layout's very set up very much like yours,
Mhm.
but he seems to have a problem with cars ping ponging between spurs. Have you experienced this or found a solution for it?
Yeah, so if that's happening, one thing you can do is if you saw the schedules that I created, there is a way to assign where you want the car delivered. And here's an example. If we're looking at our car list, you can see that the cars that come from the brickyard are pointed to be delivered to storage. So they won't go to another industry or to a different interchange. JMRI will route them back to storage before they're used again. And that's probably your solution if you're having that problem is in the configuration for that spur, have the product be destined or the car be destined when empty for, say, your staging or a storage track or a yard if that's what you're using the car out of.
Cool. How would you handle multiple industries on the same siding?
Yeah, that's being done here. The Each of the industries is just given a length of track, and JMRI treats it as a separate spur, really. And so you might prescribe that industry. You might prescribe that industry to be a separate location in JMRI, and then build a spur track at that location for each of the spots that you have, or each of the multiple spurs of that industry that you have. So for example, if one spur is for a certain type of car, you can configure that spur, that section at that location to only accept that type of car. And that's what we're doing for the Standard Oil in this example.
How about running unit trains? Any special way to handle that?
Well, I think what you're going to do for your unit train is you can make the cars a kernel if you're servicing an industry with that unit train. So if maybe it's going to you know drop off or be loaded with coal as a unit train, you can make that series of cars a kernel, and JMRI keeps those cars together. And so you can run the train as a unit train out, and if it's loaded or whatever, and back to the next location, and it will just stay together. And the spots along its route, if you're looking at the example I gave for configuring a route, what you're going to do is just give 0 moves for that unit train for every place except the place where you're going to service it. And really, it just needs one move, right? If it's being delivered and picked up from that spot, I guess 2 moves delivered and picked up from that spot, or just, you simulate it just by running it through its destination without calling it a move, I guess. Give that as an instruction for the operator. But for if you're running a lot of like short coal cars or something, it's nice to use that kernel function to group groups of 2 or 3 cars, so you're not having a bunch of individual unblocked coal cars scattered all over on the layout.
Have you seen a way to do like a repair in place, blue flag a car, just to add some operational interest? I would think that would be a cool thing to do.
Yeah, I haven't done that. You might do that by having the person running the operations here go into the cars list and give a destination of a rip track for a car, because you can go in and edit the car at any time. And so you might go in, pick on it, and have it routed to a rip track rather than wherever it was in the current state of the JMRI system. Yeah, that's an interesting question, doing that other than just picking cars to be delivered to rip tracks, right?
Yeah, that'd be a cool way if there's a way to, just randomly have it spit something out when you do the switch list, just to
Yeah.
add some things. So
And
we
again,
got
let me reinforce that I am not an expert, a JMRA expert, right? I'm sharing my experience and what I've done on my own layout using it.
cool. We've got one more question, and then I think we'll be ready to wrap it up.
Okay,
This
thanks.
goes back to the unit trains. Can a unit train or kernel train be made up of more than one commodity?
I think yeah, you could make any set of cars part of a kernel. right? The kernel, I don't think, has to be all of the same kind of car, the same kind of load. It's just a means of attaching them together to move them all as one. So I think that can be done.
Cool. Well, Rob, I appreciate you being on, and that was a very interesting clinic. I'm definitely going to have to go watch it again
Yeah, it's
later
a lot
on.
of
So,
fun. It's a lot of fun. It's its own, hobby within the
yeah,
hobby, of course.
a lot of information too. So we greatly appreciate you being on. So,
Yeah, thanks for having me,
uh,
Brooks.